Hello everybody, welcome to our webinar. The title of the webinar is How to Design Effective Dashboards. My name is Tobias Komischke. I'm Senior Director of Design here at Infragistics. I've been doing the UX stuff for a while now, and I always show this cartoon at the beginning because it's the first thing I've ever seen about the topic of UX. Back then we called it usability engineering, so I thought that's very funny. Software-based dashboards are super trendy right now, but we all have been looking at dashboards for quite a while because we have them in our cars. And dashboards in a car do the same thing in that they show not everything about the car, but the most important things in a pretty organized manner. This is another example that many people are familiar with. This is a dashboard from Google Analytics that gives you stats on the traffic on websites. Here's a dashboard that we built that shows the stock prices for different companies. So we have here Adobe, Microsoft, and Intel, and you show that kind of data over time, different chart visualization types, different details for the selected company Intel, current stock price relative to a previous price, the sales volume. So again, a lot of data shown in a very organized way, not answering every single question about all these companies and why their stock prices were the way they were, but providing a real good overview. So why is it that dashboards are so on vogue right now? Everybody wants to have dashboards. Why is that? Well, first, the good thing is that they are, if they're designed well, not only informative, but they are engaging. If they are easy to understand, if they are professionally designed and look great and behave well, then people would like to use them. And I look at myself. I'm not sure if you guys know Mints.com. It's an Intuit-owned private finance website. It just shows you your own financial data from your accounts, and it's really not doing crazy things, but it's done in a very nice way. So I feel it's engaging. I go there much more often than I would have to, just because I like to use that website. Then the good thing is that the dashboard only shows key data and not all possible details that there are out there. So that means dashboards don't try to distract, but they're pretty focused, yet still trying to provide real insights. So that's also a reason why they're engaging, because you don't have to try to understand it for 2 hours. It's very fast to grasp what the dashboard is trying to convey. The third bullet talks about that a dashboard is not only meant for you and you alone. It's meant for several people. And that means by looking at the same dashboard that has the same underlying data and shows the same kind of information, it brings everybody on the same page, quite literally. So that means that in a company, as a group, communication that happens and decisions that have to be made are really based on the same agreed upon information. And so everybody talks about the same thing when they look at, for example, the health of an organization. And obviously the last bullet says that it's good to have dashboards because they not only show the current status, but they allow over time to track progress against targets. And so it provides for a really good, consistent measure of the health of your organization or business or IT landscape over time. Okay, this is the last slide that has Zoolander references in it. I'm actually super excited about Zoolander 2. If anybody of you know, when there's a release date, please let me know because I cannot find that out. I just know that they work on it. This slide talks about misconceptions. There's two main misconceptions about dashboards. One is that dashboards would be comprehensive, really explaining things exhaustively. And it's not the case. Dashboards are not comprehensive. If you want to analyze making decisions for your business or whatever you're tracking with the dashboard doesn't give you all answers. A dashboard may be the start of the exploration into more comprehensive information, but in and of itself, a dashboard, is not comprehensive. And the second misconception is that all dashboards would be all visual. That's also not the case. Typically, they're very rich in data visualization elements for a reason that I'll tell you in the next slides. But that doesn't mean that there cannot be any other content types like tables or any other structured alphanumeric information on them. And so why visual? Visualizations are considered to be more attractive than alphanumerical data. If you ask people to rate the attractiveness of a data visualization versus the same data shown in a table, they would rate the visualization to be more attractive. But even more interestingly, we as humans are better in processing graphical than numerical data. Let me demonstrate that to you. I will show you now first a very simple data table that has 10 persons and their heights. And all I'm asking is, as fast as you possibly can, figure out what person is the tallest person. Okay? As fast as you can. On the count of 3, 1, 2, and 3. Which person is the tallest person? Okay? Hopefully you have it by now, but it's typically not instantly. So for those who still don't know, the tallest person that we have in this table here is person number 7, because that person is 1 meter and 87 1 meter and 87 centimeters tall. And so what happened when you try to find this out is that you have to do a serial search. You actually had to go through the whole list of heights here to find that out. And so we know that serial search is lengthy and it's also error prone. So it takes a while. I will now show you the same information in a graphical way and just mix up the association between person number and height. So it's the same figures, but it'll be another person now who is the tallest person, and that person is 1 meter and 87 tall. And again, try to tell as fast as you can who's the tallest person now. 1, 2, 3. Who's the tallest person? Whoa, very clear. It's number 4. So what happened now? This time it was not a serial search, but it was a parallel search. We didn't have to go through every single of these columns in the chart, but we saw instantly, even pre-attentively, before we actually knew what we were looking for, we saw that this guy here is the tallest guy. And all we had to do after that was to go down and read out number 4. So that is a reason why visual representation of data come in very, very handy. It's very fast to acquire, and also, and this is shown here actually in this paper here too, at the bottom that I cite here, also to memorize what is shown here is easier and can be better done when it's visualized. Okay, so we have dashboards. We also know about reports. So what's the deal with that? What's the relationship between dashboards and reports? Well, it's a continuum where dashboard is one extreme of the continuum and a report would be the other. So a dashboard is typically dynamic, so that it updates, oftentimes actually in real time. And increasingly we see that dashboards also are interactive. So you can mouse hover, for example, and read out more details, or you can zoom in, zoom out from a visualization, these kind of things. While a report is typically static. It is what it is. A dashboard we look at from a more high level, while a report is really deep in the data that it provides. And that means a dashboard is more like at a glance, when we just want to see, what's going on, but we don't want to spend too much time with this. And the report is actually more involved. You study a report. You just don't glance at a report, but you study that. A dashboard is shown. Typically, the best dashboards are those that are only on one screen. It's again showing everything together in parallel. A report actually may have many pages, and so here you see at the bottom a typical printout of a report. Because we have a lot of data, it goes really deep, and it's involved. It's typically spanning several pages, if not pages, then screens. Dashboards are typically dominated by graphics. We already said that there can be tables and alphanumerical information that are structured, no problem. But typically, if it's a dashboard, you would see visualizations on it. While on a report, the typical report actually just has ASCII in it, just like table after table after table. And so the nature is that a dashboard would show information, while a report shows data. And that means that this is not black and white, it's a continuum. If I want to move up from my data level and say I want to have this summarized or aggregated or synthesized, I would move towards a dashboard. At the same time, if I'm coming from the dashboard and I feel I need to have more information, I want to drill down into the details of what I see on my dashboard, I would actually move here towards the right, towards the report. And then I may find myself here somewhere in the middle where I do have overview information that are even here shown as visualizations, but I have a lot of ways to drill in deeper and show data rather than information. And so dashboards and reports are really two ends of a continuum. It doesn't mean that you can always only live on the right or left side. There's a lot of middle ground in between. So obviously I will talk about best practices, but I thought it could be fun to start with the worst practices. So these are things that you can do, but may not be the best idea, such as doing that kind of stuff in summer. The first one is exceeding the boundaries of a single screen. Again, the speed in which you can access information on a dashboard is an important criteria for its quality. So it is about providing fast insights. And for that reason, you want to have your dashboard on a single screen where there's no navigation involved, where you have to go from one screen to the next screen and navigate right and left, but you want to see the vital information right there in your face. Now, I've seen dashboards that separate information, for example, through tabs. So it's still a navigation step, but there's only 2 tabs. This already, it's a little bit borderline. So I think it's sometimes okay to do that, but you still lose this parallelism. If you have tabs, you can only see 1 tab at a time. So basically, you always only see 50% of what you could see. Or this example here on the right, that actually is a single screen, but in reality it's not really, because you see all these blinds, and here they are all collapsed. This one here is open, and you see how much stuff is in there. And so opening and collapsing and managing the content here, and then vertically scrolling up and down is a real effort, and then it's not purely a one view dashboard anymore. it's just a little bit too much. On the continuum, this would be somewhere in the middle. It would not be straight on the dashboard side of the thing. This worst practice is about supplying inadequate context for the data. So context of the data means that you have to show what the data means because you relate it to other data points. If you have a visualization on your dashboard that looks like this, where you have one data point, well, what does it mean? How do you interpret this one data point? It says for November 2014, 1. Whatever this is, let's say this is sales or this is a bug in a software, this can be whatever. But if you only have one data point, how do you know if this is good or bad? Is 1 the target? I exactly hit the target? Or is 1 super bad because I actually want to be at a 5 because 5 here is the max number on my y-axis? Without showing a context for your data, you cannot answer that problem, that question. And for that reason, this here is not a good practice. Displaying excessive detail or precision is not good, again, because it takes too much time to understand what you're looking at. That's not what a dashboard is trying to accomplish. This here is actually not a bad dashboard at all, but it does show a lot of details in a very precise way. So if you try to understand what this one here means, this column here, it has spread. It's not easy to actually see what's the difference here between this row and this row and this row. And that means, obviously this is a scaled down version, but even if you look at this full size, it's very, very dense. And so it's not very easy to see here. And so the question is, do you really have to provide that precision here on a dashboard, or would that be more on a report side? Choosing inappropriate display media. So this is showing maybe the right information the wrong way. And the wrong way can be that you use maybe not the best chart types that there are, or maybe you use not the right colors. So if you look here on the right side, 3D bands, used to be modern and fashionable. They're not anymore. Or showing this kind of data as 3D columns is excessive because they are so small, so that you have so many next to each other that you have all these different lines that separate these columns that actually don't provide you any more insight. It's just cluttering up the screen. So this talks about ergonomics and how best to present data. I'll talk about that in the best practices section. Introducing meaningless variety, basically showing the same stuff in different ways for no reason, is also not something that you want to do because it just takes time for a viewer of a dashboard to understand what he or she is looking at. So here, for example, this is here from the sports world, some statistics, and the same data is shown in 3 different ways: as a gauge, as a thermometer, and here kind of like a vertical bullet chart that grows here from the bottom. So why would you show the same data in 3 different ways? There's no real meaning for this. It would be easier if it all was the same, because then if you understand one set of data, you understand at least the depiction method for the others in the same way. Not highlighting important data. That's not a good practice, because you always want to show what's signal and what is noise. So here's another dashboard from Google Analytics, and you see here that it looks so gray in gray. There's tons of data, but you don't even know what to look at because there's no real highlighting. The pie chart sticks out very well, but everything here that is more tabular, you don't know what is important and what not, and so you would actually have to serially read through all of this to understand, what is important, what's not important. Cluttering the display with useless decoration. So here, even though you may not know German, this here is some statistic about exporting of bananas in a certain time period. And useless decoration here is, for example, this wicked way that this chart here and its background sides here on the walls shows bananas. That's just distracting from the data. So why would you show this here in the background? It just distracts from what is actually the key information, that is the volume of the exports of bananas. Misusing or overusing color is a standard topic in UX design, not only for dashboards but throughout. So here, this is a really strong tree map control here, where all the colors are like super saturated. Obviously it's a traffic light metaphor. The red is the 100% red and the green is 100%. Everything is super saturated and very strong in the eyes. That's a little bit overusing things. Misusing colors would mean that the color coding would not be appropriate. So for example, red typically be associated with something that's not good, and green is something that is good. So misuse would mean, which I don't know here, that it would actually show something in red that's actually not a bad thing. And the last one, designing an unattractive visual display. Again, this is also true for every user interface that is visible. You want to have an attractive user interface and not something that is ugly. And if you look at here, if a gauge is elliptical rather than round, it makes you wonder. Same as here, the labels that show the value per pie chart segment, they are all overlapping. That's really nasty. It's also not usable, but it's also looking very, very bad. So that's also something that is not a very good practice. Dashboard design best practices. First of all, the really critical step at the beginning has to be to determine what we want to show on the dashboard rather than how we want to show it, right? Because if you don't show the right information to provide insights, to make the lives of the people who use the dashboard easier, then it really doesn't matter how I visualize it. So the first thing is determining what to show on the dashboard. What information is essential to the person or a team or a whole company, essentially the audience of that dashboard. What helps them? What makes their job easier? And also, what data and what metrics do we actually have available to turn into meaningful and insightful information? We may know what we want to show, but we don't even have that data. And so oftentimes, it starts with the enlightenment that we don't even have the right data. And then so we have to first work towards accessing, collecting, and documenting and archiving the right data before we even can talk about the dashboard design. And then obviously, what insights do we think should the dashboard provide? And that obviously can only be determined by working with the target audience of the dashboard. We cannot sit alone in isolation in our little cube and think about what we want to provide to people. We have to work with them to determine that. So once we have done that, once we know what to show, then we can think about, okay, how do we show this? How do we present information in a way that they are insightful and informative? And then we talk about things like the layout, and do we do things in charts or tables or both? Then we talk about what chart types are more appropriate than others for the data that I have. And obviously considering ergonomics and design. There's so much we could show on a dashboard, but then we don't want to clutter the screen, but we want to show focused and meaningful information. There are chart types that are optimized for small real estate, and here are two. Both of them have been invented by data visualization / dashboard gurus. Sparklines were invented by Edward Tufte and bullet graphs by Stephen Few. Sparklines are data intense but design simple and word-sized visualizations. So they're very intense in the number of data points they show. So for example here, this is showing 65 months of here this exchange rate, euro to US dollar. And so many data points, but it's not about really knowing what is the data point in month number 32. That's impossible to know. It's more about showing what's the overall shape here of this curve. And you see here, it starts high, then goes low, and now climbing up again. That's all that this sparkline is trying to convey. But it's nice because it really fits in line with text. So here in line in this table, it can also fit in line with continuous text. And so that is, it's really nice. Again, it's not about reading an individual data point out from this, but looking at the overall shape and trend. Bullet graphs here at the bottom show, for example, here revenue in a year. And it also shows very interesting things in that you see here the line of this horizontal black bar is my current value. So here, for example, if this is my company year to date sold, 260, 70, I would hope, it's thousands, $260,000. That's great. I can see this. I can also see that here's this tick mark, a reference point, and that may be my goal. Maybe the company's goal was to sell 250,000. And so we actually already overachieved that goal. That's very cool. And also in the background, we see here this gradient from dark, middle to light. These are just bands, here attainment bands, where I say, as long as I'm here, I'm in a really bad shape with my revenue. If I'm here in this range, yeah, that's okay. And if I'm in this range, I'm really good. And obviously I'm really good because I even overachieved on this target here shown by the tick mark. So again, this visualization, bullet graphs, they don't consume a lot of real estate either. So both of these sparklines and bullet graphs are two examples of chart types that lend themselves very well on dashboards because you can show quite a number of them without consuming the available real estate. Another way to deal with limitations of real estate is the so-called graceful degradation of detail. And that's nothing else than responsive web design that we use in general. When you collapse a menu, for example, when you go from a large desktop form factor to a phone. It's the same principle applied to visualizations. And so gracefully degrading detail means here, for example, here I show a bullet graph, with all the information about red band and yellow band and green band and my target value. Well, if I don't have the real estate to show all of this, I can gracefully degrade that detail into just saying, well, I'm here in the yellow band, so I just color code this circle here in yellow, and I say the value. That's it. I don't show where would be green and where would be red. I just degraded that detail. Or here, for example, going from here to here, I, for example, remove the labels on my axis, here on the x-axis, and say, well, I don't show here 0, 10, 20, and I actually move in the labels here on the y-axis into my chart. That's another way we can do it. Or here I have a set of columns, and here in the first step I turned the column chart into a line chart, again getting rid of the labels and even a lot of the grid and tick marks for the axis, and just say, here's kind of like the pattern of bad admissions. And if I do this to the extreme, I can just say, okay, in the end, here's the overall number of bad admissions. So here I don't even see it over time anymore. I just say for 1 year, there were 8,370 bad admissions. So just reducing details is a good option. It's just is important to not remove too much and too many details, because then you don't know what you're looking at. Here's a third way to manage limited screen real estate. These dashboards here have been created using our own tool, Report Plus, which is available out there for both iOS and Android. These screenshots here were taken directly from an Android device. That's why you see here the keys at the bottom. But let's focus on the center. Let's assume that it would be beneficial for people that use this specific dashboard to see the data points here not only in a visual way but also in a tabular fashion. But we don't have the room to show that here because the dashboard is already full. So what are the options? We can provide a left swipe that would then reveal a couple of functions. From here we can tap on the table icon, and that table icon then would flip around that chart. On the other side of that chart we then expose the tabular way to show this. So here's the table showing the same kind of data. And now I can also take the same gesture and go back and flip it over again back to my visualization view. So this is nice because I use the same screen real estate and I offer two different ways, two different views to look at things. The guy that invented sparklines, Edward Tufte, also coined the concept of data to ink ratio. And he's saying the data to ink ratio should be maximized. Data to ink means how much ink or how many pixels do I have to use to show my data. And if you have no decoration whatsoever, every pixel is only used to show data and nothing else, no chrome, then you have a data to ink ratio of 1, and that's ideal. But it's really hard to reach that because everything that you would put in that is not only data but decor or something else would make the data to ink ratio smaller. So, but it's an interesting concept to think about. The maxim, the heuristic should be, I really want to make sure that I spend my pixels on data and not on something that is fluff or eye candy. Another best practice is to place the values and labels as close to the graphic as we can. So here, for example, the legend is off the pie chart, and we can make this better by just combining the legend with the respective value points. So that we would have northwest 23%, northeast 21%. That would limit the eye travel that's necessary to move from left to right and right to left just to see what label applies to what kind of pie chart segment. Or here on the right side, you see that I moved the value per region here inside of the bar itself. Oftentimes you see that the value would be positioned just right to it. So there's no hurt in this to move this actually in. And by that it's actually closer, and the overall eye travel here is also reduced. You want to place the most important information towards the top left of your screen, of your dashboard, to support the so-called F-shaped visual scanning path. And we know that from also website design that in the Western culture, where we read from left to right, people's visual attention starts here on top and then goes a little bit towards the right and then down and then right and then down. And so this looks like an F. And that means if you really want to make sure that people see the most important information, you want to place them towards the top left. And you remember this dashboard here that I showed at the beginning? The actual stock price of the one selected company is actually shown here on the top left for that very same reason, that this is the first location that people look. It's also good to highlight things. Obviously, you could ask, well, isn't everything on the dashboard by nature important? And the answer is yes. But having said that, there's even things that are more important because for some reason you may want to highlight certain data points. And there's different ways you can do that. Here, for example, by the use of color. So here the screen bar clearly sticks out amongst those blue ones. And maybe I am the salesperson for Miami. And so I really want to see this. While I'm interested in all the other cities, Miami is the one most important to me. So that's why, I would want to see this a little bit highlighted and stressed. Or here in the middle, for these spark lines, I just added a little dot here on the maximum value per spark line. You see it's very subtle. It's not really super strong, but it allows me to see, where is the peak here. These are years, which means these are months, 12 months. So here, for example, I would see that, towards the beginning of the second part of the year was the peak. Here it was at the very beginning. So that's just interesting to see, and it's just subtly highlighting things. Or this example I showed about serially scanning the height of these 10 persons. Well, we wouldn't have taken so much time to figure out what person is the tallest person if we just had highlighted this one row here from the beginning, right? So this just shows how easy it is, but also how well it works to highlight important things. While this one here, it is highlighting important things, but then it's highlighting so many of those values that again, it's not really focused enough. This is really too cluttered. You want to save this maybe for Christmas because then you have a very nice Christmas tree where everything blinks and shouts for attention. If too many things shout to attention, then nothing gets the attention. One of the worst practices was to show data in isolation without a context. This here's the counterpart now. In best practices, we do want to provide context for our data. And we can do this in many different ways. For example, we can extrapolate into the future. So here I have sales data that ends here in October. Oh, I'm not even sure if this is October, but this is the 10th period. So whatever this is, it ends here in the 10th period. And now I can, for example, extrapolate that data and make a forecast. Say here I put a linear model over my data. And that model tells me that in period number 13, I would be around here. So that puts my data into a perspective. In this case, it's into the future. This one here is not going into the future, but providing reference points to historical values. So for example, here I have the dark columns are 2012 and the lighter columns are 2011. So for any month, I have a reference point so that I understand here for August, this value here, is it a good value or not? I don't know, but I know that in 2011 it was only that little column here. So it seems that this is a pretty good value because it's higher than the one of the previous year. In the same respect, I could also say that the previous months of the same year are reference points, right? Because I see that August is higher than July. but it just provides a reference. It puts my data into a perspective. Or here about this, the dashboard about the stock prices. I see here that Google, at one point here last year, the stock price was $583, and it actually was down that day. So again, not only just showing the price, but also here's a reference, it's actually lower than it was right before. And what I can also do is I can show the data values together with target values or ranges. And that's exactly what the bullet chart actually is doing again. I know that I am here, but I know that my reference point was here, this tick mark, and I also have the bands of really bad to okay to really good. The same goes here for this gauge, where red shows this is an unacceptable range, yellow would be yeah, so, and green would be it's the good range. And so I'm here with my current value in the good range. When it comes to the use of colors, we don't want to overuse them. That was one of the worst practices I talked about before. Here in the best practices section, I want to make sure that we don't do things like this, where everything is too strong and too bold and too much in the face, because all these colors here are too pure. 100% red, 100% green, etc. Even the background here is 100% black. It's way too strong. So instead, we want to use desaturated colors that are lighter on the eyes, but still separate enough between the hues. And when we do that, it gives us the chance to use saturated colors more for highlighting data. So here I highlight this particular year, or here I highlight all the Q2s of all the years. It works well. What about polarity? Should our dashboard have a positive or a negative polarity? There's actually no clear answer to that. From an ergonomics perspective, talking hardcore here, we would say that a positive polarity, where we have a light background and then dark content on top of it, is generally better. But then we've all seen, very compelling, professionally designed and dark themed UIs out there. So that means ergonomics is not the only decision criteria here. Things like branding, aesthetics, visual design also play a role. So no matter what you do, whether positive or negative polarity, just make sure that you have sufficient contrast to separate between background and foreground where your information sits. The background should be achromatic, so it should be colorless, because then it's neutral enough to show different colored visualizations on top of it. And the last bullet talks about that we want to have one harmonious color scheme throughout the dashboard. And we don't want to color different areas in the dashboard with different colors, because there's no reason to it. It would just be, again, looking very busy and cluttered, and there's no real reason for it. So just don't do it. So let's talk a little bit about charts. Charts not only live in dashboards, but it's a major part of dashboards. What charts can convey is things like time series. So our categorical scale, typically the x-axis, then represents the time. For example, 12 months in a year, or years in a decade. Compositions, part to whole relationships, deviations, the difference between a value and a reference. We can show distributions, we can show relationships, for example, correlations of two paired sets of values. And we can show comparisons and rankings, which is showing our values against other values. This slide is just for your continuous entertainment, typical chart types and when they were invented and by whom. I think it's interesting because you see that some of those, they're all very known, but they're kind of old, 1786. And it just talks to the fact that they obviously work, because if they didn't work, we wouldn't see them everywhere. So there's a reason why they're still around. They're really powerful. And kudos to this William Playfair guy. He's a Scottish man who invented here, three of the most used and prolific chart types there is. That is to say, we have tons of different visualization types we can use. But the question and the challenge is, what type should I use for my data and to convey what? This slide gives some guidance. So depending on whether you talk about showing composition or distribution or comparison or relationship, here are the options that you have. I think Microsoft Office at some point had a similar guidance in their help files. I'm not sure if they still have that, but they also try to provide help in just determining what chart types makes most sense for whatever you want to show. Now, here's another slide that shows a continuum. And the message here is that when you choose your chart type, it is a consideration to say, what chart type looks attractive, looks aesthetic, and that's fine, but it shouldn't be the only consideration. Another consideration that's really important is how easy or hard is it to understand the particular chart type. And this one here, this slide shows a continuum from easy to understand and to digest to hard to understand and digest. And on the extremes, the best thing you can do in terms of easiness to understand is if you have a chart type that shows the value as the position along a one-dimensional scale. So bar chart, column chart, even a line chart. It's very easy to interpret. On the other side, something that has volume and is three-dimensional is the hardest to understand and interpret. And so here, all of these four chart types show the same numbers. You see here, there's one large value. The next two are actually the same, then a little bit smaller and significantly smaller. It's very easy to see this here, right? It's very hard to see these differences here on this 3D pie chart. Well, especially as I also choose to make this transparent. But even here, the chart type that relies on differences in the area, so for example, bubble charts, it's really hard to see the difference here, for example, between green and purple, while it's pretty clear what the difference is here on this chart. And so this just shows here, please be considerate of what is easier for humans to look at and to interpret the right way. The easiest would be on the left, the hardest would be here on the right. Let's talk a little bit more about 3D visualizations. Here I have a really cool looking 3D chart, and now the question is, how were sales in Q4 2012? It would be somewhere behind these two columns that are of no interest to me whatsoever. So I cannot really tell, I have no idea. But hey, this thing looks really, really good. Now, in dashboards today that are interactive, I could allow the user to rotate this thing and change the perspective to actually see the data point that is now blocked. But that's not the idea of a dashboard. A dashboard should be so focused and at a glance that you don't have to do that. So this kind of chart doesn't really lend itself well for a dashboard or for any kind of visualization actually. Here are two alternatives. On the left, this is a panel chart. Edward Tufte also calls this small multiples. It's a decomposition of the 3D chart into 5 individual charts that share the same categorical label but are separate for all the years. I think this is much better readable and understandable than the 3D chart, but you do need more real estate here, and you do have duplications here because every chart brings its own y-axis scale labels with it. I really like the one on the right side. This is showing the data in stacked columns. It doesn't require more real estate than the initial 3D chart, and it's still very clear. And it actually gives you one advantage that neither the 3D chart nor the panel chart on the left has, and that is the sum of these stacked segments gives you now the total for a year, right? So here Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3 plus Q4 is about 170. That I don't see easily here on the panel chart, for example. But here I just get this very naturally. It's very easy to rate the value here by just looking at the height of it. Now that we talked about charts, let's talk about the other component that is critical for dashboards, and those are tables. We want to use tables when it's important to show individual values. So sparklines is one extreme where we cannot really read individual values, but we are more interested in the overall pattern of all the values together. Well, tables here allow us to focus on the other extreme, where we really want to see individual values. And we want to see those values in a high precision. So, we want to see, for example, the decimal places, because it may be super important. We can use tables for also combining summary and details in the same display. So here, these are all details. These are just numbers for quarters, but I also have a concept of a summary, because here I have the total over all the quarters for a particular year. In other tables, it also makes sense to have a summary at the bottom and to summarize over here the different rows. Things to consider for table design on dashboards include the use of white space. Don't make your tables too dense. Leave in some breathing room, because that supports readability. Another way to support readability and more visual scanning is the use of alternating row colors, where every other row has a subtle different background color to just show the differences between the rows. You also want to use highlighting to show and stress important values. And there's different ways you can do this. You can use different fill colors, where you fill the cells with different background colors. You can also use a border around the cells. You can use text treatment, for example, bolding the text or using a different font color. And obviously you can do all of this not only on the cell level, but you can also do this to highlight a row or a column. Most text that we will see on dashboards lives in a structure, so typically tables. Let's look at tables and see what we can do with them. So here, let's take this as a starting point. This is an unformatted table, and what can we do there? One of the things we can do here is write justifying the actual values. If we do that, we create these white spaces here, these openings here, that even visually show us that these numbers here are smaller because they have a digit less than the rest of these values. So yeah, that's something we can do, and that is conforming to the justification recommendation on the previous slide. One more thing I can do is maximizing the data to ink ratio. This was this thing that Edward Tufte was saying, of removing everything, every pixel that is not representing data. So here I just removed all the grid lines. And we see here that we have still good white space here between the columns. Not so much though for the different rows. So this may be a little bit too much, and this just shows that just maximizing this data to ink ratio, removing everything that's not data, sometimes is reducing everything too much. So what can we do there then now to like go a little bit back on that? Here, for example, I spend a little bit more pixels to bold the text here for the categorical labels, the years and the quarters. And on the right side, the title for the last column. So here I actually decreased the data to ink ratio, but I did this to make a little bit the distinction clear between what's categorical labels and what are the actual quantitative data points in that table. I can make this even a little bit stronger by introducing just separator lines for these categorical labels to separate them from my values. I can do that, and okay, this now looks very clear. What else can I do? I can support scannability by putting in alternating row colors. And you see here that every other row here has a slight subtle gray background that helps me just in the scannability of my table. It's not a very strong row color. I actually hope that you can see it here in the stream. And what else can I do? Well, maybe I want to add spark lines. For persons that look at my dashboard that only want to see, like, in the year 2005 and through the year 2015, what was my pattern per year? Q1 through Q4 in a particular year, was it always good, or did I had like valleys here in my pattern and peaks? For that reason, a spark line would be very interesting. And finally, what I can also do is emphasizing maybe max and min values here. And so I just like have a cell background here of a red for my smallest number and a green for my highest number. Again, because now I don't have to go serially through. So I know that my smallest number ever accomplished was in Q4 of 2012, and my highest number, my record quarter, was Q2 in 2009. Okay, that's helpful. So all these things you can do to apply to tables. This is the last slide. Just shows a couple of references. I had mentioned the names throughout: Stephen Few, Edward Tufte. My recommendation would be to start here with perceptualedge.com, which is the blog from Stephen Few. It's very good, nice read, and tons of examples. Thank you very much for watching.